Marc, adult child. It's so nice to see all of you. Thank you for asking me to share, Renee. I knew when I didn't hear from you yesterday or this morning that there might have been some sort of confusion. So when I logged on, I saw her face and her head was kind of tilted, and I could tell that there was some sort of confusion. So I'm glad we worked it out. Um, Let's see. It's some of your faces I do recognize. I attend Shameless on a regular basis and Healing Hearts, which is on Mondays and Thursday nights online. So the online meetings have really, over the years, helped my ACA emotional sobriety and have been so helpful in building a deeper community in ACA. So I'm very grateful for all of you. Let's see, some fun facts about me. I like music. I listen to music every single day. I could actually listen to music and care less about watching television. It is something in my sobriety and my ACA sobriety that I have learned and have been able to dive deeper into. And all types of music, it's become a hobby. And I'm telling you this because before ACA, there were some places I just could not go emotionally with music. So I'm able to listen to it and enjoy it and love it. And I always did. And it doesn't bother me like it used to. I went back to school at 50 years old, and Renee and I were sharing about it for a little bit. I own a business as well, and I simply went back to school because my accountant overcharged me for my accounting services last year. And when I asked him about it, he said, you have to pay for good work. So I decided to take an accounting class. Something I never would have done before ACA. And I decided to go back and get a finance degree. Now, going back to school as an adult is one of the hardest things, but you retain the information and you want to learn. And I never thought I could do it before. I thought I wasn't smart enough. So I know that I am now. That's good. Another fun fact about me is that I'm also an alcoholic, and I've been sober for it'll be coming up soon. And I do foresee that it's going to go well because I'm in a good place. But it's my 12th year in sobriety, and I've been in ACA since this is my 6th year. So I've been around for a bit. So what I want to say, because this is a longer share, and what I want to say is because I know how I am in longer shares. I listen for a bit, I tune out, then I come back. So just to let you know, if you're a newcomer in ACA, your life, when you stick with this, is going to completely change. It is not going to completely change overnight. It is going to take time. In ACA, there is no time limit of how long it takes in order for it to change. It happens when it happens. So I know in Alcoholics Anonymous, it's more of a structured working the steps, and you have to get through the steps. And then afterwards, that's how you're going to stick around in sobriety. That is not how it is here. And that is the beautiful thing, because if it was, I would not have been able to stick around. It is very emotional. As you will hear, the things that I went through destroyed me. They destroyed my personality. They destroyed how I am in personalities. I had zero self-esteem. So just know it is also painful. But when you get to the other side, it is a different life. And for myself, the reason I got sober in order to find ACA is because I deep down initially found all of these things because I wanted to feel good. And I get to now. I get to feel good. I get to feel, and when I feel bad, I get to know why I feel bad. And it's okay, because life isn't perfect and I don't want it to be perfect. But all of this has just become a part of who I am. It is not all of who I am. And I love that. So it's good to be here. I will start with the growing up as an adult child of an alcoholic. I grew up in the Midwest. I remember on a daily basis, or excuse me, not on a daily basis, but I remember when my father was a binge drinker. So he would go out for 2 days. My mother would have to get herself home, and then I would go with my mother to get us dinner, to I had to I was her confidant when when my dad wasn't around, because I was the oldest child, right? So I didn't realize this eh, as I didn't realize this until I worked ACA. I always thought it was my dad that was the horrible person in the way that he treated me. And I realized later on that it was also my mother too, is when we would go and get food and when she was complaining about my father for not coming home, which, by the way, totally messed up and fucked up what he did, right? But my mother complaining about my father all the time, telling me how bad he was and how she was miserable and she was going to get a divorce from him and she was going to leave him. That's not something that a child should hear. I mean, and this was, I mean, I'm like, this is elementary school and junior high. So, we would do that. And then I always remember it was about 1 o'clock in the morning and it was clockwork that when my dad didn't come home on Friday, I knew Saturday night he was going to come home and I wouldn't eat. I would be, even if I was in a deep sleep, I would hear his cowboy boots, because he always, when he went out, I don't know if he like kept the stuff in his car or what, but he always had a leather jacket and his cowboy boots. And I would hear him hit the first step and I would wake up, because I knew that it was time for me to wake up, because I needed to be on guard. Number one, to protect my mother if I needed to call the cops. Number two, if I needed to get in between them and break them up. So I wouldn't just jump out of bed, but I would stay awake and I would then hear once again, the way that I explained this when I first got sober as to working ACA is I would always explain it as my father being the bad guy, and my mother never deserved to be abused. But my mother also had a part in this as well. And I'm telling you this because as you start to read the Red Book, you realize these things. You think it's one parent over the other, but it's both, because for somebody to stick around in that's just as bad as the person who's coming home drunk. So they would fight back and forth, and sometimes it would just be verbal. And other times there would be furniture flying across the room. There would be holes put in the wall. And, by this time, my brothers and I would be behind the furniture. And then I would be running out in front to break them up. There were instances where my mother was always yelling, call the cops, call 911. So I would get up, grab the phone, and then sometimes my dad would take it away from me and hit me with it. And, and then verbally abuse me in other ways, because he was wasted. He was drunk. So they were fighting. And so that was regular. That was my regular childhood. Now, something else would happen too, is that we would end up in, because sometimes it got so bad that we had to leave. Sometimes it got so bad that the cops were called. And when we had to leave, we would end up in shelters. And again, I didn't remember that until I started working in ACA. We would end up in women's shelters for like a week. And, you know, with my mother having full intention of leaving my father, we would end up at neighbors' homes. And neighbors we would have never really talked to until we were at their house because my parents were fighting. So shame, right? So that would happen. And then there were other times where my mother would, and I would go with her for this, and she would get a lawyer and she would say, we're getting a divorce. And I would be so happy because I would be, finally, I will be free of this man, you know? And so she would do it. She did it a few times. And then the next day or a couple days later, my parents would literally be in the front seat of the car holding hands and kissing. They were young parents, so they would be just cuddling, and I would be in the back seat and I would be like, oh my God, they're not getting a divorce. And then there were times that my father would just look back at me while he was doing that. And he would say, you thought you were going to get rid of me, didn't you? And I remember just being so mad that, you know, and just mad at him, not so mad at my mom for that. And because of that, my father we would go shopping. And listen, I like to shop. I like clothes as a kid. Whatever. But I would pick out a shirt, and no matter what the shirt was, he would say things like, only a faggot would wear that. Why are you picking that out? You're such a fag, you know, just stuff like that, you know, is amongst other things that he would say. He would say that my body is too skinny. I have a girl's body. You know, I was too quiet or I was too loud. Anything I did, my father had something to say about me. Now, it was to the point where when I was alone with my father, I could not even speak to him. Like, it was anger, it was fear, but I would be frozen. And I remember I would do everything in my power not to go anywhere with him, not to be alone with him. And sometimes I would just have to be alone with him in the car. And I remember just being so stiff and not wanting to talk to him. And when he would speak to me, I would just give him the most hateful response because I hated the man. Straight up just hated him. And that was my childhood. And I remember one time when my father came home, it was in the summer, and he said something to me, and I literally crawled up and just started wailing and punching him uncontrollably because I just hated him so much. And it was uncontrollable. This particular situation, my dad didn't hit me back. He let me just hit him. And I bring that up because so many years later, the realization that he felt it too. I know that he did, but he wasn't necessarily a bad man. He was an alcoholic, right? So I lived that way. I would run away from home. I would come back home. I would run away from home. I had three brothers, and you know, I talked to my brothers about this. Now they have more things they remember, but they didn't grow up the same way. They didn't have to get into the middle. They were mostly just, they stayed sleeping, they stayed away. So they don't have the same memories that I have growing up. So, you know, I found drugs and alcohol, and and it saved my life. It really just saved my life because what my father did to me and what my mother did to me is they made every decision that I made, they made me second guess it because I didn't feel, I was so self-conscious about every move that I would make. And so when I found alcohol and drugs, it shut the voices down, it cooled them down. And I wasn't somebody who just did it for one night. I would go on for days because I wanted to stay in that good feeling. So it found me not just alcohol, but it found me other substances that I was able to completely disassociate and escape. And like I said, it saved my life for many years. And I moved out at 17. I was still in high school. It was miserable. I moved in with people I shouldn't have. And I managed to make it through high school. And I had the wise decision to move to Europe for a year because that's the obvious choice. You know, you leave Omaha to move to Europe. And there I it was okay, you know, because I was able to just party and I learned a lot about myself over there. I learned about that, and I share about this all the time too, even with like clients, we talk about like, you know, traveling is such a big, you know, that's another fun fact. Traveling is a big part of my life. And what I learned about myself over there is that when I was taken away from the situation that I grew up in, I had some great qualities in social situations. And it was something that I needed to do. And what I mean by that is that I built some self-esteem when I moved to Spain for a year. I was able to, you know, be on my own and realize that I'm okay, you know? And now as a child, I was always that kid who would question what my parents said to me. And so, what I mean by that is that there was always that kid who had a lot of intelligence and a lot of great qualities, but my parents also saw them and their way of controlling me was breaking me down, right? So I'm telling you this because this is how I was in relationships for years. I moved back from Spain to Chicago. Before I moved to Spain, though, I was in a relationship. Because of the way that I grew up and because that I knew nothing about relationships, or what I knew about relationships was this. I thought when you were in a relationship with somebody, you're supposed to fight. And if you don't, there's no passion there. You know, it's boring and there's no passion. I also thought you're supposed to break furniture. You're supposed to get wasted together. You're supposed to cheat on them. You know, that's what you do. But the biggest thing is that I chose lovers that I thought I could control because it was safe for me. So I would choose people that I thought I could control, and I chose people based on that. So I chose people that I didn't really get to know right away, and that I would end up in deeper relationships with them. And then when I would realize that they had their own personality, their own goals, their own things they wanted to achieve, it was a surprise to me. And that's where the conflict came in. And it was really all based on fear because I wanted to control relationships, and, you know, I wanted to just have things go my way because I wanted everything controlled and, you know, to be safe. So over the years, in choosing people to be in relationships with, I chose those type of people. But then in choosing people like that and then realizing that I didn't really like who these lovers were, I wouldn't break up with them when they weren't what I thought they were. I would do everything I could in order for them to not like me, dislike me, hate me. I would disappear for 3 or 4 days. I would fight with them. I would sometimes hit them because I became a perpetrator just like my father. And I remember always saying I would never be like him, but I would perpetrate and I would sometimes hit them, and then I would never break up with them, but I would completely destroy my life and I would lose everything for them to break up with me, for them to finally break up with me, because I didn't want to be the bad guy breaking up with them, which is so ironic because I would do everything I could for them to think that I was a bad person to break up with me, but I couldn't break up with them. So there were so many times in my life that I was starting over. I would lose everything and then I would start over again. And so I always thought it was just because I was an addict. I always thought, like, when I got sober, I thought it was just because I was an addict, but it was because, you know, first of all, I didn't know how to choose lovers, but it's also because of the no self-esteem and then low self-esteem. And, I traveled for many, many years for in a creative makeup industry in my 20s and 30s. And I I had, relationships were easier when you're just traveling because you would see them and then you'd go away, you'd see them and you'd go away. When you're actually in a relationship with somebody, you have to, like, you've got to get to know the person, and you've got to, like, let them be who they are, and there's just all these other factors that come into relationships that I didn't know about. And you know, you have a realization when you get into ACA that it's also, I'm codependent, right? So I realized I was codependent, but in ACA later, but then I didn't know it. But, so relationships, not a surprise they went the way that they went. As far as career, like I said, I was able to travel and do some amazing things creatively, but I would again not show up for 3 or 4 days and disappear and then come back and manipulate the situation. And they would let me come back on. I would get fired. It was such a, I loved it. I loved losing everything and then working back up to a certain point to get it back. It was this high for me. And it was complete chaos, but not surprising the way I grew up. So I've been sober, like I said, I've been sober a while, and I've had the opportunity to, work the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. And without getting sober, I'll rewind because I'll talk about why I got sober. I got sober because I'd gotten sober before, and it just didn't. I got sober many times, and I would get sober in order to, like, get it back together. But this last time that I got sober because it was I just didn't feel I didn't feel good. I felt like I didn't want to go on any longer, you know? And I took a chance on it, and I got sober and I worked the steps, and it completely changed my life because out of all the chaos that I'm sharing with you, the reason why it was all chaotic was because I couldn't stay sober, right? And so when you take away the chaos, and what the program did for me is it helped me build some, I didn't have any tools. I didn't get any tools from my parents. It was, they were good at keeping a job, but they hated their job. They complained every morning when they woke up. They didn't like it. So I didn't have any tools. And so it gave me tools in order to, of course, stay sober, find a spiritual way of life. And I am so into the magic of ACA and AA, of the spirituality. And so I was able to build that foundation. So then in sobriety, have also had relationships. And the relationships that I started to have being sober were different. They were completely different. They were adult relationships. I was able to actually like the person rather than choosing people that I didn't like. So I got to get to know the, not only lovers, but friendships as well on a deeper level. And I didn't come at them the same way. I don't come at people the same way. I get to know people. I specifically these two relationships. We knew each other. We liked each other. Like it wasn't me trying to manipulate somebody because I needed to feel safe. And even if the relationship didn't work out, but I still talk to this person and I still love them and we're still friends. I was never able to do that before. So relationships are really, I had a lot of relationships. I know I'm spending a lot of time talking about relationships, but let's move on. I'll move on to why my last relationship and why I'm in ACA. Because let me see how much time I have left. Is there?
We don't have a spiritual timekeeper. You are on you. See.
Okay, I love it. So let me get into being in ACA, because it's just it's my last relationship was somebody that I will forever be changed by, somebody that I will forever love, somebody that I wasn't trying to manipulate, somebody that I actually liked and took the time to get to know and was in a relationship with, but he was just too young. And he was why I found ACA after this. I'm so glad I did, but I still was in the mode of wanting to take care of somebody all the time. And I remember the first time that we broke up, I knew we shouldn't be together, but we broke up and then he got really sick. And he came to my house and was really sick and was in bed for 3 or 4 days, like literally sleeping for 3 or 4 days. And I could not have been happier, because that person, even though it wasn't healthy, the fact that he was there meant that I had this person and they're in my life and we're in a relationship together. And I mean, that's just the way that it was. And we stayed together a little bit longer. And there were things that I started to hear from him that weren't healthy on his part. And before I would have completely ignored them. He would say things like he felt invisible around me, things that I wouldn't say in the past, but felt. And he would say things like, he wanted to do this and he wanted to do that. And I was stopping him from doing these things. And there was a moment that I was finally like, I have to let you go. And it was the hardest thing, but the best, an amazing realization that I knew I had to let him go, because it wasn't just about letting him go. It was about me being in a different place and wanting different people in my life. And so we broke up, but in breaking up, I had never felt, because before I had chosen people based on, like I said, people I thought they were and they weren't. So I didn't care if we broke up. But Ben and Bobby were people that I actually loved. And when Ben and I broke up, I dropped to my knees and was in the most amount of pain that I had ever experienced in my life. We're all here, and I know we can relate to this, but the dropping to the knees and the pain in the stomach and things you read about in the Red Book, just things you read about and things that when you're working the steps that you read about in ACA, I felt it. And there were things I was watch YouTube videos. There was this Hawaiian Ho'oponopono thing that I would do for the healing process. It actually really helped, to be honest. And as other regular spiritual things do help me on a regular basis. But I would do these things because the pain that I felt, because I was actually honest about my feelings and who I was, and I had let myself open up as a person and express who I am. So I will say that I found ACA. It was magical. I found the Red Book. I found the Yellow Book. I read them. I'm just going to go on for a few more minutes about what it's like to be in ACA. I found a Saturday night meeting. It's my local LA meeting. I remember walking into it, and I tried many other ACA meetings locally. They were not for me. The one I happened to find was on a Saturday night, which was a complete bummer. And I went in with such attitude because it was at 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. I was like, this is where I'm going to be spending my days or my nights on a Saturday night. And it's still my home group, and we read the Red Book every single day or every week. And there was a lot of crying at first, and there was one thing that I remember reading when I first came into ACA, and it was that what had happened to me as a child was not my fault. And that was such a realization for me. And that was the first time I started crying in a meeting. I worked the steps one-on-one with somebody. I cried after we were done. And then after I was done, I thought I was healed. And he said to me, he goes, this is a good start. Over the years, I cry on a regular basis. I've worked the steps other times in groups. I suggest you do what works best for you. It is, as you heard me start off with, this is the sole thing that has happened in my life that has completely changed it. I'm going to end with two things. This is a spiritual program. There is magic. Let the magic happen. It happens for me on a regular basis. And what the magic is is the things that I were afraid to do and didn't think I could accomplish, I am able to face. And even if those things don't work out the way that I want them to, which I no longer plan the way that things are going to happen, I let them happen. It's okay if I fail. I was afraid to fail before, so I'm not afraid to fail anymore. Thank you for letting me share. I know I went on for a while, but that's what we do. Thanks. I look forward to hearing from all of you.